Welcome to a Prevent Connect podcast, where we explore the prevention of violence against women. This is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
So I guess I can go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Strong Oak Lefebvre. I wasn't born with the name Strong Oak, but it's the one I carry now. And there's a story behind that, because a lot of Native people don't go by that, they go by their birth names, but the way in which I was named, that wasn't an option. So I'm Strong Oak, and I'm with the Visioning Bear Circle Intertribal Coalition. I've been doing this work for way longer, even before they started using the term post-traumatic stress to describe trauma. I remember being proud of being able to use it way back when. It was like in the early 80s, late 70s when people began to really talk about trauma. But today in my presentation on how can we prevent childhood sexual assault without incorporating the systemic violence as a causal factor, I'm also including the kind of agencies in which we work, because the structure that we're working from and the funding sources that we use demand that we use a pyramid model of providing services. And really, in my mind, it kind of incorporates more mainstream ways of looking at issues. But what I'm going to do is take you down some different concepts that maybe you've never heard about. And bear in mind that I'm an indigenous woman, so basically I'm going to incorporate different people of color experience, but a lot will be on what I know with indigenous culture. Like, right offhand, how many people here have even heard of the doctrine of discovery? Now, that's a shame, because the doctrine of discovery was the doctrine that was used to morally mandate the taking of land from indigenous people here. And it's seen as the most pernicious thing addressing indigenous people today. The United Nations talks about this being the single most important issue impacting our human rights. And I'll explain that more, because when Columbus first came to the Caribbean in 1492 and got terribly lost, the first thing he really did was encounter a group of people who had no weaponry. They were very pleasant and kind to him. He went back and told about these very pleasant people, but he also took slaves right away, like specimens, if you will, like really objectifying people that are different than yourself and taking them with you to say, here's the people. And then they wanted a mandate for how they could take the land, because he said it was easy to take because people did not have guns and things like this. So actually, what happened is both the political arm and the religious arm were very kind of wedded in that point. So the King of Spain said that if it wasn't Christians that were here, then you could take everything you wanted. And there's a direct quote that I don't want to miss, like sharing with you, because it's so terrible. The doctrine of discovery says that European Christians are encouraged to capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, pagans, and other enemies of Christ, to put them into perpetual slavery and take away all their possessions and their properties. And this was followed by the papal bull that the Pope issued in 1493, which called for the subjugation of all barbarous nations to propagate the Christian empire. So I'm saying, like, here we had a marriage of particular, Christianity and taking land, and in a political kind of way. And this doctrine is entrenched in the United States Constitution, because you can imagine that at first this was given to the English who were here, but then when the colonists, got their independence from England, all of a sudden now they had a land issue going on, and they had to figure out a way how they could say that they could keep it. So what happened is the United States Constitution had a Supreme Court decision. Of course, there was a case to test it, and it was John Marshall that was on the bench then. And in 1823, and that's not that long ago, think about it, Johnson versus McIntosh all lands that were taken from indigenous people based on this doctrine that was inherited from England, got put into our Constitution, where it still rests. And it complicated the issue around the separation of church and state with people. So this is my belief, is this is why that we did not get freedom of religion until Jimmy Carter was in power in 1970s. I mean, this is historical information that I feel that we all need to have, and it impacts directly upon childhood sexual abuse, and I'll make that connection as we go along. So in indigenous folks, we believe that we're all related and that we all co-create in this kind of way, and we all inform each other and transform each other in our interactions. And this is the culture that we believe in. And this is the culture we believed in when people from another culture came here. So we weren't out to just not let people in. I mean, I know there are a lot of jokes about folks in the eastern part of the country having a bad immigration policy. I use it now jokingly to talk about, what's going on now. But I'm just saying that, and this way in which we're all mysteriously related. I feel that a lot of the times that we're asked to do work, and especially here I am talking to you, who work in underfunded agencies, and you're working really hard, it's hard to have time for your own self, let alone your own spiritual development and evolution and that kind of thing. Well, when I went to the LEAP gathering, which was there are still LEAP cohorts now. I was in LEAP cohort 1 that OVW funded through CalCASA. And while I was there, I met these awesome women of color. And there was a woman there that from Samoa. I don't think she's in the room today, but she's here at the conference. And if you run into her name is Fa'alu. And anyway, we were at this conference and we were sharing culturally, and we were having it was really an amazing experience with people of color. We were all being taught how to be executive directors, how to take leadership, based on the groundbreaking report that came out that showed that people of color were not advancing in our movement and not taking leadership in our movement. So they documented that. There's this great report out about it that you could check out. It's just called Groundbreaking Report, and it shows everybody's experience. I'll be talking about some of that too. But what I'm trying to point out is that we're really related in ways that you can't see, that we don't usually talk about. Like when I meet you, I don't just meet you, it's like everyone around you, really your ancestors, your spirit. We connect on so many more levels than we are given credit for. And what happened at that conference is my partner Mary, she wrote a song about the residential boarding schools called Unspeakable Pain. And while Fa'alu, she finished her presentation, it was such a beautiful thing from Samoa that she did. I started singing the song, and she started singing the song with me to the point where no one could tell which one of us had initiated that song. And it had very specific, beautiful language to it that spoke to the history. And it was amazing, and we sang it, at the Women of Color Institute together, all three of us. She had never heard the song before. And we all have these experiences, so I want to say that that's the reason we're here. I mean, that's why we were put on the earth. We weren't put on the earth to be indentured servants. We weren't put on the earth to give our life over to someone else. And so I'm going to make some other connections with this as we go along. So when Christopher Columbus came and was able, through a mandate to take all the land, what happened was 90% of the indigenous population was decimated then. I want you to remember that number, 90%, because this is going to come up over and over again with other U.S. policies that have shaped indigenous culture today. And think about now when we talk about historical trauma that's in our DNA, we not only carry, from childhood or things, we carry our ancestral trauma. It goes through generations. So all of us here, we're bearing, inside us, the trauma of what we've witnessed, what our ancestors witnessed, all the experiences they ever had. And what's important about that is when we heal ourselves, we heal everything. We heal all that went before us, and we provide an avenue for our children going forward. So that's how important this really is. So if we could go to the next one, and after that. Okay, I don't know if people realize the racial integrity laws that they were here in the United States. This was in the 1930s. These laws were done, and how many people have heard of Oliver Wendell Holmes? Right, great, justice, right, from the Supreme Court. Well, 8-1, the Supreme Court authorized that no one could marry into the white race, because it was seen as you would be, dumbing down the gene pool. Literally, this is what they thought. And in that time, people believed this so much that they didn't even bother to sugarcoat it. It's in the laws about this. And if you see here, this is the Pocahontas rule. This was because of John Smith and Pocahontas. So they made a rule that if you were 1/16th, native, you can be considered white. That's the Pocahontas rule. So this whole issue of blood quantum really is a point of contention and controversy even in the indigenous world today, because now you have the government deciding what quantum blood you have to be in order to be considered native. And also they use this for a lot of their misogynistic policies over time. Anyway, the purpose of the Racial Integrity Act was the purity of the white race. And 60,000 Americans of color from California to Maine were actually sterilized in
keeping these laws in place. This was sanctioned childhood sexual abuse in my mind, because every child of childbearing age, if you were a person of color, were subject to being sterilized. And the the Indian Health Service had actually sterilized over 42% of indigenous women and children in the time that they were in place. And this was all based on eugenics, like Francis Galton, the cousin of Charles Darwin, of survival of the fittest fame. So really one culture decided that they were better than all other cultures. And then when you talk about the objectification of everyone else, like if only white male Christians could own land once they took the land, they decided only white male Christians could own it, all based on the doctrine of discovery. Think about, first place, now Mother Earth, and she's seen as a mother. Mother Earth now gets objectified. It means that you can do anything to her. You could take her plants, you could take her animals, you could take all of her creation and act like it's your personal, playground where you could put things on a shelf and take them when you need them without consequence. And I put, women are really connected to this land, like the creation myths that Native people have. I think I'm maybe getting a little ahead of myself, because I'm not one. I really want to point out that this is systemically sanctioned childhood sexual abuse. And I really think that a lot of this stuff may seem like it's changed, but it really has not. Think about what goes on the internet. Think about Bratz dolls and all these kind of ways in which children are sexualized. Think about what the messaging is. Think about the clothing industry and what they make for women and men to wear. And then think about, how it's taken a long time for people to recognize the sexual diversity of all living beings, that we're really, along a continuum. I mean, I knew this when I was in college, and believe me, it was a long time ago, when Kinsey made a report that we did all go on a continuum. Well, somehow or other, the continuum hasn't, gone forward in time. But we're talking now about killing people and genocide. When they started taking the land, they took way more than they could use, right? So now you have to go get people from another country to come in and to take care of it for you. So now you're bringing in people, from another country, and then you're determining that they're only worth 3/5. I would like to have been a fly on the wall when they made that decision, how they decided that someone would be worth 3/5, but it was an economic decision. And so now we're talking about massive objectification of great numbers of people.
And when you think about the childhood part, we don't all have the same history as sexual beings. Like imagine if your family could be sold, your family could be separated, like all the children that were put in the residential boarding schools. I mean, the policy has been genocide all along and removal for indigenous people, and I think it still is. I think the blood quantum requirement that they put in order to be considered indigenous is part of the decision that they think in a short amount of time there will not be enough of us to even consider. And then when you think about the land and eminent domain and the fact that they can take land whenever they want, however they want, for whatever purpose they want, it requires that we organize and that we take care of, these things, like fight these pipelines that are hurting the Earth Mother. And then think about water and its really incredibly scarce supply right now and the amount of pollution. Then I want you to think about a woman's body. All people come through their mother's water. Women have a connection to land and water that cannot be denied. And then all of the creation stories talk of it. There was some years ago, I got to hear Beverly Cook here talk about empowerment of women from an indigenous perspective. She showed Sky Woman myth, which it would take days to tell. I think it would take 7 days all day to tell that story. But the short story of it is this woman comes down from the sky after the tree of life falls, and there's a hole in the sky, and this woman is coming down. Down below is all water, and the creatures of the water are looking up and seeing this woman coming down from the sky. Being the compassionate, caring beings they were, they said, she has no place to land. There's no softness for her. So the birds go up and hold her aloft in the air until they could figure out a solution. And then different animals go to the bottom of the water to go get some mud from the bottom. And all different ones try big animals, ferocious animals. But it was a little muskrat that managed to get down there and bring up the mud to put on the turtle who volunteered her back. Now on the turtle, right, mysteriously in nature, you have so much to show you, but there's 28 days in segments around a turtle and 13 months for the 13 moons. So when she comes down, there was the sky reflected on the back of the turtle. So when she comes down and she brings all these seeds with her and she begins to plant things and grows the turtle, which we live on. Now, what she did for me was put this in context of a woman's body and reproductive cycle. She showed, here comes the woman, the egg coming down from, being released from a woman's ovaries, making that travel down the fallopian tube. Yeah, let's face it, it's a tough journey for that little egg to make it, right? And so things have to soften up down below for the landing of the egg. She put the science next to the myth. And I find that this is true for a lot of indigenous things. And, I've learned a lot from being around indigenous people around what constitutes a healthy relationship and really the roles of men and women with children. Like I was at the Honoring the Ancestors of Ancient America gathering earlier this month. I spent 8 days there, and there was a gathering. And Grandmother Renee from the Mohawk Nation was talking about the quickening that happens like at the fourth month of a woman's, when the child is being born, the gestation cycle. Probably every woman, every mother in this room probably can say that at that time you felt something different happen. She called it a quickening. Like when, someone was telling me today, somebody from Japanese called it butterflies, they felt in their body. But it's when the spirit comes in and there is a quickening of the fetus growth. If at that time a man sits in the back of the woman, puts his hands on the woman's stomach, he will experience that quickening, and that will inform the relationship that they have with that child. There's a closeness that comes when men have the opportunity to do that. So I share this with you because if any of you are thinking about having children, think about what this means. And the other thing that indigenous people knew, that at 25 weeks, a child can hear everything outside the womb. Everything. They didn't have all that science. They just knew it because they were tuned in. And like, so what would happen is the men would come, and their job was to make sure that everything was conflict-free in the community, that that child would come into the world in this trusting way, in this beautiful atmosphere without conflict in it. They would sing to the child. They would begin to tell stories to the child because they knew the child could hear. And they could hear the men's voices. You could hear. And like then when the child's born, the reason they had cradle board is because the child, they knew that a child's development depended upon being eye level with adults. And so they would begin to include the child into the community immediately. And like that child would be loved by the whole community. And like in the indigenous culture, everybody's a mother of a certain age. I have my grandmother Charlotte I just got. I don't have any children, but I'm a grandmother to all the children. It means I have to be a lot better about, like if I'm upset, I just have to find compassionate ways to express it, that I'm supposed to behave in a way, so, if there's a loss in that, I have to say, no. But I'm just thinking about, we don't like necessarily get taught these things, but there's something about indigenous knowledge, and I'll say when people of color knowledge. It's something that people who are connected to land, because I think all people of color had that connection to land. When you have that connection to land, you have time to really experience things around you, and you get all kind of signs. And like these are not things that we necessarily talk about. Like when I used to go to work, I would, when I worked at the New England Learning Center for Women in Transition, I kind of knew what my day was going to be like because I would look for signs along the road as I was traveling. And then I would be ready when I got there for whatever it was. I was surprised at how accurate and how up to speed I was just on the trip to my job. And I'm looking at nods and things like this. And I'm thinking about, like, what if you didn't have to do your work the way you do? Because I'm going to show how it's structured in that we were meant to not think and not feel the way we were meant to think and feel. Because most of us own our time is owned. Most of us have money as the intervener. Money is a new creation. And like money we need, right? Money, we couldn't have enough money for, like everybody here would like more money to do their work. But what if you could envision a time when you didn't need money to do your work? That you didn't need money for housing. You didn't need money for your clothes. That all of that was there for you to share. That's how it used to be. I ask, why did human beings do this to ourselves? We didn't all do this to ourselves. A small percentage of people did this to us. And then they commanded all of the weaponry and all the stuff to build it. But, we talk about the 1%, right? I'm saying these are the prices we've paid to be disconnected from each other. Like, what are we teaching our children about compassion? What are we teaching our children about how to be in the world? Isn't that also a form of violence against our children? To teach them not to think, to put them in room. I mean, like, I'm engaged. I can see you're all kind of engaged. But it's like, what if I wasn't entertaining, What if I was really, really boring? It's like, I just hope I'm not, but it's like, But, really what I really wanted to share was, like, that this thing that we've done to ourselves and done to our children is structured in with that. When they took over the government, they had an opportunity to do something really different. I don't know if you've ever heard of the two-row wampum belt, but this was done when, and in fact, they do a ceremony every year around it, because now is the time for all of our races to come together. Now is the time for us to do what we could have done all along. But the two-row wampum speaks to that. It talks about, like, the colonists that were working, like, with the Onondaga Nation. And, the Mohawks are very, very much warrior people. And in fact, they were, their warrior stuff is now oriented in a different way than it was. But they were really into battles and things, and they now have a tree of peace, and they laid all their weaponry down, and they began to realize that it was not in anyone's best interest to war with each other over resources. So they have this tree of peace, which they now do everywhere. They do it between cultures.
I've been, involved in some that happened in city halls in Canada, things like this. But it's like it was designed to put down your weaponry and begin to think about living and working out conflicts in good ways using transformative justice, restorative justice, or different approaches. Think about if our children didn't have to worry about, that they could do a mistake, or that they could, make a mistake and have no place to come back from that. Think about how we penalize people a lot for making mistakes. Like, what if we really noticed when our children needed us and like they had, that they were uncomfortable or they were feeling like they couldn't fit? And like, think about how our structures are so competitive and like so based on a hierarchy that you are taught to be at the top. What if we didn't have to care whether our children got into Harvard? What if, what mattered was they were compassionate, they were kind, they were happy with their lives. So I want to move into the structure puts that in place, even in the agencies in which we work, right? If someone's got their hand in your pocketbook, how honest can you be to share what you really think? And what about the people who come in for services? Where are they in informing that work? They're the last, but they should be the first. Because everything we know about survivors healing from childhood sexual assault comes from survivors. It comes from survivors. So why are they not setting the strategic plan? So the Visioning Bear Circle, we got a Just Beginnings grant, and their whole thing is about survivors setting the strategic plan. And like, it's really exciting to have a funding source that's cooperative with you and talks about building capacity for you and actually is funding survivors to speak and providing them with leadership positions. I know that there are people here that probably work in places where it's not necessarily a good idea to say who you are. But I know in Visioning Bear, we had a circle where we talked about who, how we got our names, and then we drew where we come from, and we drew on plates, circular plates, of course, like who our people are. And we shared that with each other. And then we all knew who each other was, and we hadn't done it. We had done it for other groups. We hadn't done it for ourselves, and we wondered, why hadn't we done that? Because it changed everything about how we related to each other. So I'm going to go on to some more of these things. And this is actually, if you go to the next one. This is, the nuns from the residential boarding schools, right? Today when they were doing the keynote, I'm thinking, the clergy abuse. Why is no one not linking that up to the residential boarding schools? Where do they think all those people went? I mean, by 1930, 75% of all Native peoples were in these schools. And men and, girls and boys were abused equally. And 85% of them were sexually abused. And there's some graphic look at the institutionalization for assimilation. That's still going on today. We westernize, we send our education out to other countries, and we use the English language to teach, and we put people from other countries, other communities of color, into these kind of settings. And there's militarism involved in it. Like you see all the, it's designed to get you an institutional mind. And then if you've heard of Schooling the World, in that, to me, this is forms of childhood sexual assault here. Because you separate children out like this, I can guarantee you there's a lot of sexual abuse going on in settings where parents and children are separated from each other. That's one of the first things I learned about. You isolate, you make, no one available to come to your rescue is more of a prescription for when sexual abuse will happen. So, and this is like where people were made to stand naked in front of people in other settings. And the most of the sexual abuse was done by men, but they also have that the nuns also used, boys for sexual favors. So really, in truth, just about almost every girl and boy was sexually abused in those settings. So where did they all go? And why do we not make that linkage? So next one, and this is like some children didn't make it, and children were handcuffed. This is institutionalized childhood sexual abuse, as is
sterilization, female mutilation, all of those things are institutionalized, government structured in childhood sexual abuse. And next one. And that's the Sky Woman story. It's just a nice pictorial of it. And if we move again, this is the Walking in Balance curriculum that the Visioning Bear Circle came up with. Why we came up with that is we initially were using bystander programs or other reputable mainstream agencies would find programs, but it just didn't fit our culture. So we took 2.5 years to come up with this. And what we did was we looked at what all the values were before Columbus came and before the colonial government was established. Actually, I should say more before the government was established. Columbus is too far back. But it's like, and everything was so oral at that point. Like almost everything we know about ourselves was written about by other people other than ourselves. So I take it all with a grain of salt, and you should too. But basically, when we talk about peace and justice and true democracy, we put it into the structure of our agency. Like we have, everything is done by circle and consensus. And now that we're a 501c3, which took us 9 months to decide, I have a couple of people from my community here. This is Judy Rowe, if you could just, she's president of our board now, and this is Mary Whelan. She's my partner. So, but anyway, and very involved, and yeah, a member of the board as well. But anyway, we sat for a long time, like figuring out what we were going to do, because in our community we had a lot of sexual abuse at the one gathering spot that everyone met at. That I lost count when I got to 5 sexual abusers. We tried working within that group to try. We even brought sex offender management training in. We brought all kinds of things into the community to try to get it to the place where it would prevent childhood sexual assault and hold accountable people who had done harm. But we found that with the leaders of the community not buying in, we couldn't do it. So then we had our own powwow that we did, and we had stay-away orders for a couple of people. And we did everything by the seat of our pants, I have to say. Like, we did it because it had to be done. First we said, well, here's the problem, and what are we going to do about it? And then we decided that we would form, we got funding from CDC, RPE, and we were able to look at our community, what our strengths and weaknesses were, and we formed an intergenerational council because we believe children need to be involved in this, right from the start. And I'll get into more about how we work with children because we never need childcare, but I'll explain that. But it's like, so we tried working from within only to find out that we couldn't, there was the main elder, the spiritual elder of the gathering place, I don't want to say their name, but anyway, because they still exist. But anyway, and like I was on the elder council, and the son of the man, the chief, sexually abused the daughter of another person on the elder council. And even though he had gone a long way, took the sex offender management, it could have gone really differently, but he became so identified with his son that he couldn't get his son the help he needed, and he also couldn't address, this could have been a pivotal moment in the community, but it turned out that the whole elder council broke up. We decided to go our own route, and I think this got born out of it, so I think we have a gem here, and I think it's for the best, because we have something that everyone will be wanting. Because when we talk about peace and justice and true democracy, we're talking about true democracy. In a circle, every voice has the same. We do it by consensus, but our consensus results in a lot of work getting done. We don't, you hear the thing is that, consensus takes forever. Not if everyone has a voice and everyone is free to speak fully. It seems eventually everyone sees the wisdom of certain ways. And if you're willing to be transformed, like if you're sitting in the circle, your job is to listen more than to talk. You should not be thinking about what you're going to say until it's time to say it. So that's a hard thing to learn how to do. Because, the more I'm in circle, the less I can do popcorn meetings. Because it's always the voice with the, somebody always has to fight to get in, and that's where most of the oppression happens, because some voices have no problem stepping in, and people of color most often are the ones that get left. And if you don't have to fight for your space, it's amazing what comes out. And for a child to have the same voice as an adult in a sitting like that is very empowering. And some of the wisdom that comes from the children, you know, they may be older than the souls that are raising them, from what I can see. But that's what we mean. And we look at environmental justice, economic justice, and gender equity as part of our peace and justice module. It takes us, that's our longest one. That one takes us 4 hours to do. And then it's incorporated into all the other ones. And like when we talk about this in terms of preventing childhood sexual abuse, it takes on a whole different deep meaning. Like, you know, being compassionate, you know, and learning about being able to identify what someone else is going through. One of the people in our, that came to our, that's taking our whole series of sessions, which takes over 30 hours to do, she talked about having witnessed a child in the backyard, a very young child, maybe only like 18 months or so, with no clothes on, a very hot day, and an older brother about 10 or 11 alone outdoors with the child. And she felt really uncomfortable, but she also felt like she didn't know what to do about it, which is true for a lot of people that want to be good bystanders or really want to address concerns when they see it, and then not knowing what the consequences will be, or fear of retaliation or whatever comes up. So in our circle, she asked, well, you know, what do you think about this? You know, what were the options? And then subsequently to hearing everything that we all had to share, she went and talked to the mother directly and talked to her about what she'd witnessed, what her feeling was about it. And she met with someone who was completely undefensive, that was really glad to get that information, and was in fact going to be witnessing to see if there was any discomfort in her children as to what might have to happen next. So that was a way in which this whole module really changes behavior in a real powerful way. And then when we talk about generosity, we're not just talking about, the way you might think of it. We think of it as structured generosity. We think of it as bartering. We think about how that's the only equitable thing you can really do, is if you based your life on what you had to give, then you would never have more than you need, and somebody else would never be in a state of want. And like there have been studies that show that bartering benefits communities more so. Local communities grow with bartering. And there's a lot of bartering going on in Western Mass where I live. There's currency, bitcoins, and different things. And like we incorporate in the way we relate to each other. If we see somebody need something and we have it to give, we do. And what we did for that module, Patrick was present for that. He's our evaluator, one of our evaluators, along with Morgan Curtis. And we're using a storytelling model. But children get to tell their stories much more clearly. I think you were, Patrick, in a circle. We had a 10-year-old child that talked about his experience with being bullied at school. But he talked about like some really wise things that he was, getting from the climate in which that can occur. And like if we don't listen to the children talk about this and we don't empower them, like, they can come in and out as they want. Like we had younger children quickly learn what a circle's about. Like toddlers learn very fast that when you sit in a circle, all right, everybody's talking one at a time, and they go and sit in the seat and they take their space, and then when they don't want to be there, they just get up and move, and all the parents know where they are, and they're playing, but everybody knows where they are and close by. But that's what I mean why we don't need any childcare. And then when they want to participate, they come back in. This means that the education and mentoring is happening at a child's pace, not on our pace. I mean, like children who don't get to, be seen as people who need to grieve when close people die in their lives across. It's like, it's important for children's problems to be seen as big as our own, and maybe bigger in some ways. And I look at, what's happened structurally to Indigenous people and the suicide rates that we have. Well, I think it's because of all the trauma that is being carried around with no place to go. And I often have thought, and I just want to talk about the impact of another culture on you. If I were living on a reservation right now with what I know, the fact that I would have a place to live and housing and food and my time, I would be able to work with that, because to me, that's how I really want my life. Like that I would be the one that runs my life. I would get up when I want. I would do what I need. I would work the way I wanted. I wouldn't have to work for anyone else. And I would have my space. And that if I were to impart that to people that are living in situations, to reframe this about taking back your culture, taking back that this is all stuff that got imposed. Think about, all my elders tell me this is all going away. So I'm just telling you this because when the change is the Earth Mother, we teach that plants have the same psychology as human beings. We teach that animals have the same psychology as human beings. We teach that nothing is more important than another, and that even a beetle living, if it were no more beetles, there's no more human beings either. We're that interrelated. That what we do down here affects the skies, affects the rains, affects everything. Where's the pollution going to go when it's blowing on the wind? Why is it that the Alaskan women, Native women, have more metal in their breast milk than any other people when they're making probably the least amount of pollution? But the wind blows there and it gets into our milk, and we can't escape this because everything we do to the earth comes through us and goes to our children in the breast milk. All the problems, everything, all the trauma, all of it. And then when you think about, even don't get heavy about it, because when you heal everyone. When we meet, we call in our ancestors. We call in all our ancestors. And we acknowledge that they're all there and that we're here. We made it, we survived. They didn't cross for nothing. We're here. And everything that we do. And what do we want for our children? Do we want them to not have jobs? Do we want them to be doing work they don't want to be doing? Do we want them to learn that it's okay to, step on someone else to get ahead? Do we want them to think that only a certain amount? When I went to school, we used to have to line up based on grades every week. How embarrassing that is for someone who's always at the bottom of that. What gift did they have that never got shared? We teach that the stories and the music and the art are really leveling democratic ways of relating to each other. And in the culture, what's the first thing to go in a budget? Art, music. But doesn't that really carry in, when we heard those songs that were sung by the women, didn't you get goosebumps? Didn't it go right into your heart? Didn't it speak to you in a place that, words wouldn't do? And and when you look at a beautiful piece of art, it goes to parts of you that you wouldn't be able to access with words. And so I think that we try to do that in everything that we do. And also the whole thing about sacredness and prayer and looking at, the children, the way we treat our children, we treat them we take them out of the work life and we keep them infantilized. I'm thinking about children I know at age 11 that are getting ready for Vision Quest and are spending a day with a blanket alone out on a mountain or in a butte, because by going through that, they're taking on who they are as a spirit, what their rightful place is in the world. The first Vision Quest should be done somewhere between the ages of 9 and 12. And that's 4 days without, food and water in the wild, in the place that you've worked all year, made all your prayers. And to think about that, and to think about what they feel like when they come through that. They have a solidity and a firmness inside them. It's like a rite of passage. Like have their own dreams, not their parents' dreams, their own dreams to carry forward. To me, that's a form of child abuse when children don't get to have that.
when they're like, and if you see a child that's grown up very protected in a rural area, it's very different from a child that has to negotiate gang life in the city. You know, there's a savvy about people. Like, I met some kids at Charlestown High in Boston, and they wanted to know about Native peoples and how we looked at transformative justice and circles and that. So I prayed about it before I left, meaning I was asking Spirit to be here. And I asked Spirit to be here now. I'm not telling you anything I actually kind of wrote in here. This is just in case no one answers the phone. But everything in here is actually being covered. It's being covered, but I'm telling you in a different way. Because I want to tell you the Charlestown story, because prevention is in here. Like, you got to really believe in the work you're doing and the heart from which it comes, and the spirit with which you operate. When I went to that school, I had my GPS. You know how sometimes it cuts right when you're at a crossroad? So I was going somewhere I'd never been, and I had my GPS on, because I hate driving around in Boston if I had to look at a piece of paper. So I'm like, get to the place, there's a fork in the road. I could either go down 90 or I can go in what I call the parking lot towards Somerville and whatever. So I made the mistake because the thing quit right at it, but I went to the other zone. I still managed to get there within, like, I was only about 15 minutes late, and they had a chance to settle in. But when I talked about it, I said, and I didn't know, these are the people I'm talking to. And they're all older students, and they're all involved in circle process in their school, and they're all involved in, you know, preventing violence and taking leadership as young people to do that. So I sit down with them, and I started telling them about how I look for signs, and I told them about the crossroads I came to, and I talked about how, you know, maybe in life you take a turn that you maybe didn't want to have chosen, and it's going to make you go a long way around, but you always end up getting where you want to be and need to go. So even if you do make a decision in life that someone thought it would have been easier for you, how many parents thought, well, if you just do it this way, life will go a lot easier, but your children want to go this way. So, and I saw some clicks going on, but I got feedback later about how the children in that room, that was very meaningful for them, because they were very much older students. They were incredibly wise. I would hate to think about them not being there doing what they do, because I'm thinking about, these are all the kids that choiced out. They didn't make it into all the schools in Boston that were for, you have to pass tests and whatever. So these were where all the children of color were. And there were a lot of Native people in that room. And they, you know, you see all the people of color, as they were in Charlestown High School. Wise beyond belief. I mean, they were like incredible human beings, incredibly compassionate. And there was another man in there, he asked me about, they wanted to know about this. And I said, well, this is my medicine collar. This is my teacher. I fasted to make this. And I talked about how it changes over time, and that I used to think when I was younger it was because I messed up, and therefore my medicine became unraveled. But then I realized that I grew, and I needed to put attention. So I shared that story, and this Arawak young man, he was studying to be a shaman, and he was a sculptor and an artist, and he had made a beautiful sculpture, and people told him that it had cracked in two, and that he didn't want to go in and see it because he was devastated by that. So when I told him the story about this, then he realized he needed to go in and work with that piece. And I would talk about like where there's mistakes or errors, that's where spirit comes in. That's why Native people don't believe in perfection, that we're always in process, and also why we believe that we never achieve peace and justice, that you're always working for it. The person with the least voice, which might be maybe a black woman who's transgendered, maybe it's somebody else now, I don't know, but it's the person who's the least, has the most rights taken from them, the person with the hardest time. That's the voice you need to listen to, the one that you're taught not to listen to. And think about what money does. Like, you figure out who you're supposed to talk to, who you're networking with. I'm just even challenging you now. When you network, who do you think it is that you're supposed to be talking to? And myself as an Indigenous woman, I've been coming to these conferences a long time.
I don't always see the repeat faces here from times gone by, because I don't know if people feel that they're seen, or that they're reflected, their worldview is reflected in the things that are being said. Because my life is organized around not linear, it's circular. I can drive people crazy because I'll give you context, I'll take you around the barn, and because I want you to understand it's experience to experience to experience, and things don't happen. Like even if I'm going to work and I forget something at home, I've been taught to think about, if I go back home to get that thing, that means that my whole day's changed. Everybody I meet will change. Everyone I see on the road will change. The order in which my whole day goes will change. So now when I do that, I assess whether I really need it. And then if I need it, I intend that my whole day goes better. So I pass that on too, because these are little things that really work, and they really are meaningful. I learned that the hard way, actually. It was a hard lesson for me to learn. So many of the ones I learned hard. But anyway, let's see. I don't think I have too many more slides, but we can move. Yeah. This whole thing about the circle, like envisioning there, everybody gets paid the same. Everybody has the same voice. We actually, we're little yet, but when we grow, our board and our, because you have to have a board, right? And like our board and our staff will be completely transparent and work in circle together, so that there's no secrets. Like, think about it, I'm just going to share what structure does in terms of power. Like, I've been on some powerful boards. They'll have an executive committee. That executive committee will then tell the rest of the board what they want to tell it. Then that board will translate to the staff what they want to tell it. So by the time you get around to staff, they rightfully believe that they don't have all the information they need, and like that they're not. And then if we were to make a structure here and we created a hierarchy, you would find it would be very lonely for the person at the top, because they're not talking to they're not in their community, and they're not talking to everyone. Even the worst is people call it a line staff. That's the worst that I've heard. But it's like it's built on separation, and it's built on people not having everything that they shared information. It's not based on relationship, and then when you can overcome that. Like at Harbor Cove, where I went for a staff there, they have staff meetings in circle, and they talk with each other as a staff about what the struggles are, what's going on. They check in with each other. But it turned out that they could identify problems and help people. Like if someone wasn't pulling their weight, you could say to someone, what's going on? Do you need help? It's not punitive. It's about being helpful and assuming that everybody wants to do a good job, which I actually think people do. And like, so when you work with people with that best expectation, if someone is having a hard time, it's easy for them to say, I'm really having a hard time right now, and I could use your help. And getting the help that you need, rather than being siloed in this thing that you're now going to feel bad about stuff on top of everything else that's going on with all the work you have to do. It's nice to know that you have a community of people that have your back, that are working with you, who are sharing power, that they're not into hurting each other or getting ahead at each other's expense. And even like when I think about this circle, it's like if one of us, it's been a great way for resolving conflict. It's based on transformation, not punishment. And it's based on keeping inclusion. I call it transformative justice rather than restorative justice now. Because when you think of restorative justice, you think something bad that happened that now has to be accounted for and fixed. But when you think about transformative justice, you not only think about a person, you also think about the structure that's in place that needs to change to make the whole thing there. And when you talk about prevention of childhood sexual abuse, I think it's us that needs to change. We as adults are the ones that need to replicate in our life a system of justice and a system of being with each other that will make it so our children won't even think about having violence committed against them. If there's nobody talking about taking anything from you,
if there's no way that you're being taught that you should get something at the expense of someone else, if everyone is taught that the plants and the animals and everything are equal, I mean, really, plants, it's not in their best interest to be eaten. And I don't, and even like, when people are vegetarian, right, they think, okay, if nothing's in balance, if no one eats any animals, then that's not balanced either. It's like how you feel about the food that's important. It's how you treat the food. Why would you want to eat something that was penned up and in pain every moment of their life? Why would you want to ingest that pain? Think about that. It's like, where did your food come from? And how was it treated? Like, I always actually address that in the food I eat, actually a simple thing. Like, I say that we're all related. I acknowledge the sacrifice the food has made for me to be alive. And then I address the fact that it may have experienced pain in getting to my table, and that I send healing to them and to all their families involved. Because really, it's very magical what plants do. Before the Industrial Revolution, we had much better food. We ate wild food, and we had many, many more choices of food. We ate medicinally. There are people with knowledge still today who know what plants are good for young people, what plants are good for adults, and which ones are good for elders. They're not all the same. And some people know how to continue to talk to plants. And I was riding with such a woman on my trip to Illinois, and she was pointing out things on the road. She said, loose strife. She said, this means there's pollution there. There's pollution there. That plant only exists for eating pollution. She said, and when the pollution's gone, it goes away and goes someplace else where it's needed. Look at how great Mother Earth is about healing herself. That she knows what plants will do it, and like the messes we make get cleaned up. My trees, handle pollution from my neighbor who cut down all his, and like his pollution is being handled on the trees where I live. And like when you think about trees taking away pollution, I went in, I drove into a big city. I said, they don't have enough trees here for all their air needs. And they don't have enough trees to handle all the pollution. So when they're funding, they should think about the people. And where I live in a rural area, we say, people, you don't want to fund trees, right? But we have the trees that are keeping you alive. So yeah, you really need to fund our trees. Meaning that, a lot of people who are sexually abused in rural areas don't have the same access to receive services, but really every single person needs to have the same access. And to everything, right? So I'm not sure where I'm at with time. 30 minutes? So I want to open it up for, some thoughts you might have about how could we transform the structures that we do the work, to prevent abuse. Or even ask us how this circle thing works for us. You know what I mean? We want to keep it that everybody gets paid the same amount of money, say. Like if you are cleaning the building or if you're doing an educational program, everybody gets paid the same amount. A living wage is what we're looking for. And that everybody's work is valued the same. And how do you really think about that? And how do you see that working? And I invite any of the people that work with me to talk about what it's meant for us. And just in my personal defense, I could tell you that I worked for a whole year for free. I did the same amount of work I did when I was getting money. I did it to bring our organization to a place of funding. But I did the same work. And we had decided, didn't we, that we would do the work whether we got money or not. Just because we want a safe place to live, and we want our children to have a safe place to live, and think about it. If you really think your community is responsible, would you do the work if you weren't getting paid? So I'm just throwing it out. If anybody's got some thoughts to share or something they want to say, or if there was anything inspirational about it, I could use that too. Yeah. And it's not about anybody feeling guilty. It's about all of us getting rid of guilt and shame.
all of us, getting rid of anger and all of that, and coming together to build what we want now for our kids, because none of that stuff is going to work. Building coalition with each other, treating each other well, caring about each other's children, that's where it's at. You know, and there's a movie I want to tell you about coming out called Neither Wolf Nor Dog. It's not out yet, but it talks about this man that was born with one blue eye, one brown eye, has a lot of wisdom about cultural stuff. He's a survivor of the residential boarding schools. There's a book out about it, but he talks about every single Native person he knows in this country is angry and sad. That they're underneath there's that. But we can't go from that place to heal. So that's the end of that. I'm so happy, you know, that you were here today, and you know, and I've got some information you can take.
Did you want to show that?
Oh, I have a brief film, but I don't think I have time to show it. I can? It's done. I can't show you the film.
Thank you for listening to this Prevent Connect podcast. Prevent Connect is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, with funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views presented on Prevent Connect are not necessarily the views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCASA. To learn more about Prevent Connect, visit www.preventconnect.org. For more information about CalCASA's mission, or to show your support, visit calcasa.org. That's CalCasa.org.